Welcome to the Whole Farm Podcast, brought to you by CHONEX, where we explore soil health, nutrient management, and the systems that help crops and farms perform better over time. Each episode features conversations with growers and industry experts focused on practical insights you can apply in the field. Whether you're managing nutrients, building healthier soils, or looking for data-driven ways to improve outcomes, this podcast is built to support real decisions and real results.
Welcome back to another episode of the Whole Farm Podcast presented by CHONEX. I'm here with Les from Mississippi, back with Dr. Tom Dykstra, and we're so thankful he was able to join us again. What I would say is we had a lot of comments related to this chart, and so we figured it would be best, since we do have some video capabilities, to let Dr. Dykstra actually walk through this Brix insect chart. And so I'm really excited to turn it over to him. And then I'm going to let Les jump in with some practical farming questions. And we will see where the conversation goes. So Dr. Dykstra, the floor is yours.
All right. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up the chart real quick. All right, so here's the chart that was causing a little bit of hubbub. And so let me just briefly go through this chart so that we all understand what this is all about. You'll see that it has leaf Brix at the top. That's because I do differentiate between fruit Brix, stem Brix, root Brix, and we want to stick to the leaves because that's where you're going to get the consistent measurements. Michael, I remember last week, was mentioning that he was testing fruit. Fruit is on a different scale, especially whether it's a sweet fruit or a non-sweet fruit. But when we're looking at plant health, we want to measure the leaves. And so right now, almost all the leaves, almost all the time, are between 1 to 20. Anytime they break 20, they're usually shunting sugar to other parts of the plant, and that's why we stop it at 20. But anytime you have something between 1 to 2 Brix for the leaf, force feeding is usually necessary. The plants cannot take care of themselves, and that's why we need to force feed them. So we find this on the greens of golf courses. It's very common where they're having to feed the grass once, in some cases even twice a day. And then once we do that, we have the capabilities of keeping the grass relatively healthy. Once you get between 3 to 7 Brix, we now have plants that have a fighting chance of survival. They're doing okay. They don't have to be as force fed, but they're not doing great. At this point, we've got relatively healthy plants, but they need more. Plant secondary metabolites start to increase at 6. This is when the plant secondary metabolites are those chemicals that add taste, that add flavor, that add color to the plant. That's what those things are. You really don't see them much below 6 Brix. Once we move up to 8 to 12 Brix, we now have insect resistance beginning. The plant has a sword and a shield. It can defend itself, does a really good job of it. Water retention abilities increase in the plant considerably. So for those of you who are in drier parts of the country, if you are in that 8 to 12 range, you are going to need less water than you would otherwise. And so those are some of the things that happen between 8 to 12. Now, once we get to about 12 to 20, we have a plant that is objectively healthy. Objectively meaning it's absolutely healthy. There is no test that will tell you that it's unhealthy. Every test is going to tell us that, and we are able to determine that very quickly in the Brix. Food is now produced, at least real food, the food that you want to eat, that tastes good, that's going to give you a long life so you can live to 70, 80, 90, or 100 years or so. That's the type of food that we want to produce. It's now fit for human consumption. And the big plus, there are no insects and no disease on these plants. So the 12 to 20 range is what we are looking for. We would prefer something a little bit higher. I prefer to be in the 14 range at a minimum if I can get it, but 12 is usually good enough for some people. Now, what I've done is I've superimposed insect feeding guilds on this same chart because I've determined that some insects are found on higher Brix plants and others are found on lower Brix plants. So we have the aphid group, which includes the aphids, and includes the scale insects, phylloxerans, things like that. They're going to leave a plant once it reaches 6 Brix, sometimes 7, and by 8 or 8.5, they're all gone. Other sucking insects, not the aphids, such as leaf hoppers, plant hoppers, frog hoppers, stink bugs, lantern bugs, things of that sort. They're going to leave a plant once it reaches 7 Brix, sometimes 8 Brix, and sometimes 9, depending upon what's the species. Then we have the chewing insects, which are going to leave the plant at 9 or 10 or 11 Brix, and the chewing insects are the Lepidopteran, and past those are the caterpillars. The beetles, beetle larvae, are another type of chewing insect, which are commonly found in agriculture. And then by the time we get to the grasshopper group, they are, shall we say, a little bit closer to humans than I would like them to be. But they will leave a plant at about 10, 11. And at 12 Brix, even though they're not interested in a plant, they will take a bite. That's why I have the 12 plus there. And so this grasshopper group, which includes the grasshoppers, the katydids, the crickets, and things of that sort, have the ability to eat higher quality food than some of the others. So this is the chart that I alluded to before, and we've now got the 2 variations of the chart that I often use during my presentations.
This is actually really, really helpful to have the visual to go with it. And thank you for pulling that up for us. So in our world at CHONEX, and in Michael's background as agronomist, my background working in both conventional and regenerative agriculture, we talk a lot about soil health and building soil health as a way to reduce dependence on synthetic fertilizers to get more bang for your buck on yield, to improve your soil health. But let's talk a little bit about how a farmer might take the knowledge that you're giving to us today on Brix, and how to apply that practically in terms of developing soil functionality in a way that will drive these Brix numbers and help us achieve this insect and disease resistance we're talking about this morning.
Okay, there are a few general principles that I can describe, and then there are specific principles that are really keying in on the particular farm. I do consulting all over the world. Because I'm consulting all over the world, I'm dealing with different lands, different cultures too, but and sometimes that affects agriculture. But there are some things you can and cannot do, and at that point, I do have to get specific. So let me talk first about generalities. So if you are dealing with insects attacking your plant and you have unhealthy plants, which also usually means you have unhealthy soil too, because it's hard to raise healthy plants in unhealthy soil and vice versa, then we have a problem that needs to be taken care of. And the first thing that should be obvious to everyone is that we have a sugar problem. So if we have low Brix plants, we have a sugar problem. If sugar is the main problem, and it is, because that's what the plants are putting into the soil. We know from last week, I mentioned that the root exudates are putting out 85 to 90% sugar. So we know instinctively as scientists that the plants feel that the most important thing that they can put in the soil is sugar, and that's what they do. The rest of the 10 to 15% can include, humic acids, fulvic acids, it can include amino acids, it can include a lot of other things that the plant may want to get into the soil, but sugar is at the root of it. Therefore, if you want to start increasing Brix levels, usually the first thing, especially when you're dealing with a very low Brix plant, and so if I'm dealing with a 3.9 Brix plant in the field, we're in big trouble. We're in huge trouble right now. And the first thing to put down is going to be sugar. It's hands down, it's going to be the first thing. Because if you don't have the sugar, nothing works, nothing moves, no energy is occurring. The microbes need sugar. The fungi need sugar. The plants need sugar. We need sugar. This is our main energy molecule that we use in order to make ATP. So we need sugar. So when you are putting down something in order to health up the plant, the first and most important thing is going to be sugar. It's not the only thing though, but it is going to be first and foremost. And so that's one of the first general things that needs to be said. Many people usually ask, at what level are we putting this stuff down? Well, I don't know. It depends upon the farm. So for farms that have never put sugar down before in their lives, and they are dealing with 3, 4, 5 Brix plants, we are going to be looking at putting down between 20 to 80 pounds of sugar per acre in order to boost, to jump start the system. If you do not, if you are dealing with relatively healthy plants, 9, 10, and 11, we don't need to put down 20 to 80 pounds of sugar because the plants are putting down a lot of sugar into the soil already. And since sugar is the most important ingredient in healthy plants, not the only one, but it is the most important and the first, well, we don't need to put as much sugar down when we are dealing with an 11.5 Brix plant. At that point, there are usually other things that we want to do. So those are some of the general things that farmers need to consider is they need to put down a massive amount of sugar. And then if they want, they can start backing off over time. So for your information, the best sources of sugar are usually molasses, especially in organic molasses that doesn't have any of the glyphosate in it, which you will sometimes find in some of the other molasses. Brown sugar is certainly adequate. You just have to turn it into you have to dilute it. So dilute it in water because we always want to be applying as a water-based. If you put it out as a solid and spread the sugar out, as I alluded to last week, the ants are going to carry the stuff off. So once you put it down as a liquid, it just soaks into the soil and it feeds the microbes, and that's what we want to do. So that's what we are looking to do. That's the first thing. If you are looking for some other things to do, usually it is to put down micronutrients. The micronutrients, and some people will say, well, what micronutrients are you talking about? All of them. You may be short copper, you may be short iron, you may be short manganese, you may be short any one of the other nutrients that are out there. You could be short cobalt, you might even be short nickel, even though you don't need that much of it. But you're going to need these micronutrients. And if you don't have these micronutrients around, you are going to have slight drops in Brix. And at that point, if a plant is usually liking to be at 14 plus Brix, it will drop down to 12 or 11 or maybe even 10 if it is missing a micronutrient. That's usually the second thing that is required. Which micronutrient do you need? In a sense, it's usually a pretty good idea to put down all the micronutrients that you can because it's too sometimes time consuming to figure out what you need. But if you do know that you have a genuine deficiency in cobalt, well, have at it. Put down some cobalt and you should be able to improve the situation. And you can measure this with Brix within 24 hours after you put the stuff down. You can see whether or not the cobalt, which should be put down in conjunction with sugar, by the way, if the cobalt that you're deficient in is the magic love potion number 9 that you may need for your crops. But if you are dealing with even lower Brix levels, you may be missing more than one micronutrient. And at that point, you could be short cobalt, you could be short manganese, you could be short iron, you could be short copper. When you are short several of them, what's usually happening is that you have pesticides which are chelating the micronutrients. That's usually what's happening. Not always, but usually. And so I'm going to ask the farmer, are you using pesticides because they're holding on to the micronutrients and preventing them from getting inside the plant? And at that point, we're going to need to start backing off. Some farmers want to go cold turkey and stop it immediately. This will release the micronutrients. If they're going to need some, if they're not comfortable doing that, then at that point, we need to start backing off because those micronutrients are the second thing, which I usually find. So those are the general things. We need sugar, we need micronutrients, but specifically, it's really done on a per farm basis when I get very, very specific with the recommendations that I am making. But those two generalities really kind of set the tone for any discussion for any farmer, and I mean any farmer anywhere in the world.
These farmers might be able to know via a soil test, if they're short a micronutrient.
Right.
They're also going to see on that same soil test, they're going to see an organic matter percentage. And on that soil test, they feel like that's some sort of indicator on maybe plant health or where their soil is going or has been. Can you talk a little bit about the organic matter interplay into this conversation, Dr. Dykstra?
Absolutely. Let's take a look at what the plants think, and that will answer your question. The plants feel that sugar is the most important thing, and that is a carbon source. So we understand that carbon is the most important thing, and we also understand that carbon is adding to the organic matter of the soil. So that's the most important thing. If you want to increase organic matter, you have to be putting the sugar down because that's what the plants feel is the most important thing. There are other forms of organic matter, other forms of carbon. You will notice, if you take a look at the root exudates, that they have some humic acids. They will have some fulvic acids. We also have compost. We also have biochar. All of these forms of carbon can be put down into the soil. But I want to point out that the plant is not putting down prodigious amounts of compost, prodigious amounts of biochar, prodigious amounts of humic acids, fulvic acids, and things of that nature, the amino acids. It's not putting down a lot. So we understand that they're all important. I'm not going to de-emphasize anything that I just mentioned. But if you decide to pass on the sugar and just want to put down biochar, you will find you are going to come up short because you're not going to be able to afford to put down enough biochar or compost or other things. You can afford to put the sugar down. That stuff is relatively cheap, and that's the sugar source that you want. Once you've got that down, you are now increasing organic matter, which is your question. And when we are increasing organic matter, everything changes for the better because that organic substance is going to be holding on to the micronutrients rather than the pesticides. It's going to make it available to the plant. That carbon is going to become part of the material in the microbes. It's going to become part of the material even more so in the fungi, including the mycorrhizal fungi. They're all carbon-based, even more so than the microbes. So you've got carbon, 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 carbon. There's all this carbon that needs to be there. And if we have a genuine shortage, our plants will not do well. So these are the things that need to be done. As you can see, we need to put that which is first, and that which is second, third, fourth, and fifth. Make sure that they're in the right order. Otherwise, you can spend a lot of money that you don't want to spend because right now we have very low margins among farming nowadays. So I want to make sure that we focus on that which is most important while not forgetting that the plant has other things that it wants to put out there too. Even the secondary plant metabolites, which I have on the screen right now. Those plant secondary metabolites are included in the root exudates, but there are not a lot of them. They've got very specific plant secondary metabolites, some terpenes, some glucosinolates, some flavonoids, whatever it is. Some of that stuff goes down in the roots with the sugar, and therefore there can be a benefit to using some of these plant secondary metabolites, and many companies have successfully used plant secondary metabolites because they are an important part of the picture, as the plant tells us. So that's kind of the big umbrella overview of carbon and organic matter for you, Michael.
One of the things you mentioned is that you see a response within 24 hours on the sugar. So if a farmer, has a scout go out and say, you've got these particular insect problems, spray this pyrethroid, spray this particular insecticide, and, you spray it and you start seeing bugs die. What is the response time on, you've got a Brix of, 7.5 and you make an application of a biological and some sugar to try to get your Brix score up. What is the timeline on when you see the insects stop feeding?
The timeline on the insects is very similar to what we measure on the Brix scale, which is usually about 24 hours. If you have to wait more than 72 hours, you've kind of waited too long. So at this point, the effect upon the plant is going to be very, very obvious because as soon as the plant, for example, if you put down a micronutrient that it's missing, that it needs for photosynthesis, you're going to get a jump in photosynthesis. And immediately the plant, after it starts photosynthesizing, will put out more sugar because that's the end product, and our Brix goes up. So I am looking for a minimum of 0.5 Brix. I mentioned it last week. I'm mentioning again is that if you put something down and you don't get it to move at least 0.5 Brix within 24 hours, then you may not be dealing with the plant may not be utilizing the way that you would like it to. However, having said that, we've had jumps of 2 Brix. And a jump of 2 Brix is just about as big as it gets in 24 hours. And so when you are jump starting the system and getting the plants to photosynthesize, they're now producing sugar and it starts spreading throughout the plant and it does so very quickly. That's where we get the jumps in Brix. So anything between zero point 0.5 and 2 is usually a good sign that you are going in the right direction. I should tell you too, since you asked that question, if you do put pesticides down and some of the salt-based fertilizers, you get a drop in Brix. That's another reason why I'm not a big fan of this, because the plants are telling me they really don't like that stuff. So I'm trying to go up, and in some of the things that we put down, it goes down, and I want to be able to go as close to 14 as I can. I'm trying to avoid getting it down to 2 or 3, which we can effectively do with some of the products that we are putting down in conventional agriculture today.
You're saying that if a farmer has a particular insect issue in a field and he's already, doing some of the right things to make his soil and his plant healthier,
Mhm.
um, he could take half that field and take the conventional recommendation and spray a pesticide on it, and take the other half and uh, make an application or make follow a recommendation to increase brick score, and in a similar time frame, he would see equal or better results on the side of the field that he dealt with the bricks instead of a pesticide.
Yeah, the result though, I do want to point out, is going to be measured in Brix. So you may not notice the difference with your eyes in 24 hours. Therefore, you do have to use the instrumentation. So for those of you who are thinking, oh, I get to avoid soil tests or plant sap analysis, that type of thing. Well, I mean, they all have their place, and I like testing, and I use that testing all the time. But as far as visually seeing something, sometimes you do have to wait. So, for example, if you are spraying corn and the ear hasn't appeared yet, how well is the ear going to respond to the application that you put down? Well, you're going to have to wait for it. It takes a while for a corn plant to produce an ear. And so there are some things you're going to have to wait for, other things you won't. And so by focusing on the leaves, you can get an answer very, very quickly, within 24 to 72 hours, depending upon. Most of the time, it's within 24 hours. Occasionally, you will need 48 to 72, but within 24 hours, I'm looking for a change. And if that change is in the right direction, fantastic. That's all thumbs up, all power ahead. Let's continue going in that direction. And you should be able to notice the difference on 2 sides of the field, one of which has the pesticides, which is actively chelating the micronutrients, preventing them from getting in the plant, therefore reducing photosynthesis, therefore reducing the Brix levels. And on the other side of the field, you start to put down some nutritionals, which essentially is just another word for food, stuff that the plant wants. So sugar is not something that the plant wants, I should mention. That's just to feed the microbes. When you put the sugar down, it doesn't go inside the plant. All of the sugar inside the plant comes from photosynthesis. So when you are putting down the sugar applications, it should be in the soil. Sugar is not efficiently taken in through the leaves. Does some of it get through? Yeah. Is it efficient? No, because I have never seen a tree bend over and start eating the ground with its leaves. Maybe you have in some dreams before, but this is not reality. And so we do not feed trees through their leaves, but we do feed it through the soil. That's why all of these applications should be done into the soil in order to be optimal. However, sometimes we have some problems. And if we've got toxic soil, there are people who bypass it. And at that point, that's where foliar comes in, because the soil is not doing its job.
That's really helpful. I think a little bit of a follow-up or a clarification. So you said um, you don't see a visual impact, you see it in the brick score, but let's say in a row crop setting, a farmer is growing soybeans and he's got indication of a flight of insects come in and started feeding. And his response would be, I need to spray something and kill those insects, and he'll see a response and the insects have stopped feeding, the plant starts to look healthier in several days or a week. Whereas if he doesn't spray, the plant's going to get worse. So that's what I was looking at response time. So if you treat to improve the bricks, you're going to get a similar, better response in actually stopping to see the insects feeding.
That would be
You know,
correct.
it's not
That would
feeding
be correct.
frequently.
If you
Okay.
get there early enough. If you get there
Yeah.
early enough.
Yeah. So if you respond as quickly as you would with an insecticide, you'll see as quick or quicker response in insects stopping to feed. That's it.
Absolutely, you do. Yeah, it's usually pretty cool. Within a few days. That's a good rule of thumb. Within a few days, you're going to see a difference in the application that you put down, which could make it worse or better, but you should be able to see something. And that will also come with the eyes too. The eyes will start to notice things that it
Right.
didn't notice before.
You've consulted on all kind of different crops, all kind of different settings all over the world. And Michael and I are both in the South. CHONEX works all over the country. We've got
Mhm.
a great guy we work with out in California, but even here in the South, we've got a lot of diversity, or even in my area. So, I go from a rice farm in the Delta that's heavy clay, that's all irrigated, and then you go into the hills and you're working with a sweet potato grower that's, sandy soil, and um, so you can't go out and visit thousands of farmers that are watching. Are there some general things that you've seen as far as different impacts on different types of crop, like or different conditions? Like we're facing a serious drought here in our area this year. Um, is the impact of on Brix any different for a different type of crop or a different type of growing environment?
Okay, well, drought. Let me talk about drought because that's a very specific problem that all farmers all over the world deal with. And so when you are dealing with drought, obviously, we all know this, it means a lack of water. If you have a lack of water, there are two things that could be occurring. Either one, there's not enough water maybe coming down on the plant, either through rain or irrigation, or you're not able to retain water. Now, the second one, I can talk about a little bit more. I can't control the weather. And I can't, irrigation, we do have some control over, but as far as water retention, and I alluded to that, and there it is right on the screen right now. Maybe that's why I'm thinking of it right now. You have the ability to hold on to water, and that is through carbon. So that ties back to Michael's question right now, is that the more carbon you have in the soil, the more water is retained. It doesn't percolate through and pass through to the water table. It remains available in the rhizosphere. And so by putting plenty of carbon into that organic matter, you are able to retain it. In addition to the carbon component, you also have the pure sugar component. Sugar is hygroscopic. You leave it out on the table in a high humidity environment such as Florida, where I'm from, and it will pull in water. You will actually see the weight increase of the sugar over time as it pulls in water and gets heavier. So sugar has that probability. So it can actually hold on to water. That's another form of water retention. When you have more carbon and more sugar in the soil, and I realize they're kind of synonymous, you usually have more microbes in the soil. When you have more microbes in the soil, they do not survive without water. And so they must take a sip of water, very, very small, much, much less than a drop, a small sip of water in order to keep their bodies going. Well, hello, that's water retention right there. And that's even more important than the soil. So you can hold more water in a soil with a high concentration of microbes than you can by focusing on the type of soil. How many presentations have I been to over the past few decades where, guys are getting out there talking about water retention in sandy soil is not good. Water retention in clay is too good. Sometimes it washes off it. We need a little bit of a mixture because it's all about water retention this, water retention that. Virtually no one talks about the microbes. The microbes will hold on to water better than the type of soil that you have. So when I am dealing with the different countries and the different soils and the different crops, we need to make sure that we have some of the basics involved. And that's what you're asking. And that is going back to what Michael said. It's carbon, it's sugar. And when you've got those, you've got more microbes in the soil. You've now got water retention such that a farmer, literally on opposite sides of the fence, and I've heard this literally dozens of times in the past year, that a farmer, his crop is dying because of the drought. And the farmer on the other side of the fence is able to get his crop and keep it alive for just 2 more weeks. It's not doing great, but just 2 more weeks where he's actually able to get his crop and get it into the silo, the grain bin. He's able to harvest his crop and make money. And that is from water retention. So there is something on the opposite side of the fence always, which is able to hold on to that water. And that's what gets you through the drought. I did mention to you, I just used a figure of 2 weeks, but I do want you to be aware you can't go without water forever. You got to have water. It's the most important thing. It's what makes photosynthesis go. So you've got to have water. But if you're able to retain it just a little bit longer, you can usually get through another week or two and save your crop, and that is a lot of money to a farmer. So that's how I would respond to the drought thing, and that would be indicative of anywhere in the world. Whether or not you have sandy soil, whether you have the clay soil, you do want to be able to keep that water in the soil, and some of the things that I just mentioned allow you to do just that.
That's fantastic, Dr. Dykstra. We have about 3 minutes left for one more question, and I'm going to ask you basically an impossible question. So instead of you having to answer specifically, I'm just going to say if you could guide our thinking a little bit on this topic. And this topic is around nitrogen rates for growing crops like corn and cotton, even pasture, for instance. And I'm just going to say this just because I have heard so many different things. Too high nitrogen rates, my plants are going to crash out. They're not going to be doing well. It's going to attract a bunch of insects. Then I've also heard that it has nothing to do with it, that nitrogen makes plants healthy. Therefore, they don't, they probably have higher Brix scores. And I say probably because I know every circumstance is different. So my question to you is, can you guide our thinking a little bit on how we should look at nitrogen as it's related to this conversation?
Sure. Excess nitrogen, which is usually through the application of the salt-based NPK fertilizers, lowers the Brix level. So go ahead, spray it, measure the Brix, go ahead and spray it, and go measure the Brix again, 24, 72 hours that we talked about right now, and look to see what happens to the Brix levels. Generally speaking, they're all going to remain about the same or they're going to go down. And this is an indication that the plant doesn't really like what you just put down in it. So that's an indication that the nitrogen is not as beneficial as we think it is. So nitrogen is absolutely important. It is imperative. But how did we do this 100 years ago? How did we do this 1,000 years ago? We were raising plants that long ago, but we weren't putting down nitrogen. And yet they did just well. They produced their own nitrogen. And that is really where the crux of the question that you're asking is right now. Soil has the ability to produce nitrogen. It is not just the legumes. It's not just the rhizobia and the legume crop and the nitrogen nodules. They have the ability to produce nitrogen. There are 3 types of nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and one of them is the free-living nitrogen. That's the one that the corn and the grasses, the monocots often use. And if you allow them to do their thing, they will make nitrogen. Usually they are inhibited from making the nitrogen. And that's why raising crops has changed over the past few decades. 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, we weren't dealing with this problem, but we are now. And so when you're dealing with a high nitrogen crop, you need to have a lot of nitrogen produced. If the nitrogen fixing bacteria are not fed by the sugar and other nutrients that it needs, they will not produce the nitrogen. The crop will start to turn yellow, which means you will have chlorosis developing. And then the farmer will shrug his shoulders and say, I'm getting chlorosis. I don't have enough nitrogen. I have to make an application. And then they will go out and they will spray the nitrogen down. It will force it into the plant. It will green up the plant. It will usually lower the Brix, but it will green up the plant. It will make them look healthier. And that is how we bypass the problem of not producing enough nitrogen.
As a practical agronomy thing for me, what I've kind of taken away from this conversation is, if I'm out there looking at pest thresholds and I'm walking a field, bring your refractometer. I think it's almost a more immediate ability to do something versus, me even collect insects. I can take a refractometer test, a Brix test, before I actually go and even assess pest pressure.
Yes.
I think, to get to Les's question a little bit more direct, because there was this kind of side by side thought. I think as an agronomist, we need to be very on top of things, or planned and scheduled and intentional about this. And so I think from a standpoint of where I am, I think, it's easy once you get in that thought process of testing Brix when you're out there in conjunction with assessing pest thresholds, because most conventional guys are going to be out there with the swoop net. We're going to be looking, we're going to be counting, we're going to be doing other things. But alongside that, can we do something where we're more proactive around understanding what's really happening in the plant and where it's going directionally? So, I just really appreciative of this thought, really appreciative of the soil first mentality that you brought to this conversation, Dr. Dykstra. I want to remind our listeners there are lots of really good soil health assessments. That's part of this whole farm podcast. Is doing nothing is not an option when it comes to understanding the soil health that you have on your farm. We have to have some sort of baseline. Lots of laboratories that are conventional chemical extraction analysis soil laboratories have some sort of soil health offering now. So if you're not asking your laboratory that question, please do that. Ask what they have and ask how they read it. Ask how you're supposed to read it. And so, you can't change what you can't measure. We have to start somewhere. And so this Brix conversation has really been a great extension of this. You can't change what you can't measure, or you don't measure. And so I just want to say thank you, Dr. Dykstra, for bringing this message out there, getting this message out to all growers. That's the purpose. All growers are curious about some of these topics. And so just want to say thank you. We maybe have 1 more minute left. Do you have any parting thoughts, Dr. Dykstra?
Well, you just mentioned one parting thought, which I can do in a minute or less, maybe 30 seconds. And that is, when you're counting insects, you can tell how low the Brix is by how many insects are on the field. So if you have a very, very bad infestation, that's going to be indicative of a lower Brix, whereas a casual infestation usually means that the Brix may be at least 2 points higher, but still somewhat attractive to the insect. So measuring by counting is still important, and this actually has a correlate with Brix. So that's my 30-second addition right there.
I'm grateful that you were able to do this with us, Dr. Dykstra, and I think this is information that we need to get to all our farmers, to not only help them grow healthy food for people, but healthy food to not have as many insects. So
That's what we're all trying to do,
win-win.
Les. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you to all our listeners out there. We'll have some more information in the show notes. Thanks, Dr. Dykstra, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Whole Farm Podcast by CHONEX.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Farm Podcast by CHONEX. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone in your network. For resources or to learn more about CHONEX, visit chonex.ag. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.